May the one who began a good work, may the one who began a good work, may the one who began a good work be faithful to complete it in you. I'm Anne Morrison Garber, and this is my mother,
Josephine Hutchison Morrison.
And Joe was a charter member of Waverly Road. I was 3.5 years old when the church started, so I've been there for my whole life mostly. And so when you first came to Kingsport, it was what year?
1939.
And why did you come to Kingsport?
Well, I came to Kingsport to be director of Christian education at First Presbyterian Church.
Okay.
I had been in Raleigh, North Carolina, in that position at First Presbyterian Church.
Okay. And you had to be okayed when you came for an interview by a man who has a very familiar name in Kingsport, one of the founding fathers of Kingsport. What was his name?
Mr. J. Fred Johnson.
And he had a department store, which at one time was called J. Fred Johnson's.
Yeah.
Anyway, you had been interviewed by the minister, and then you had to be okayed by Mr. J. Fred.
Well, Mr. J. Fred at that point was kind of father of Kingsport, but he also was a member of First Presbyterian Church. So he kept in very close touch with the pastor, Dr. McCorkle. And so he had to, Dr. McCorkle said, the weekend I came to be interviewed, he said, now we're going to have to go and you're going to have to be okayed by Mr. J. Fred Johnson. So, as I remember the interview, we had a little visit, and the interview was not what you would call an interview. He just said something similar to, well, young lady, do you love the Lord? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, do you love young people? I said, yes, sir. He said, all right.
So, I understand that at that point in Kingsport, there were a lot of young men and women, particularly young men who had come from all over the country to work at Eastman, including Dad. And you had grown up in the same town as Dad and gone to college in the same town, but you all had not really known each other until you came to Kingsport.
That's right.
And he was in a young men's Sunday school class there.
Yes.
Right?
It was a big young men's Sunday school class.
So this is what First Presbyterian was like. And so what do you remember about how Kingsport was growing and what the thought process was about expanding and building maybe some outlying churches?
Well, at that time, the First Presbyterian Church was doing a lot of looking at planting churches all around Kingsport. And they did, one of which was Colonial Heights Presbyterian Church. And then there was also Bethel Presbyterian Church. And the others that went, and finally Waverly Road, of course, but there were the other churches really did not survive.
So, in particular, the area around Waverly Road, you were telling me a lot of little houses have been built in
Yeah.
Midland Drive, Pinole Avenue, all that area, Magnolia, all that
Yeah.
area. And those were built for what?
They were built at the beginning of World War II to house workers to come to Kingsport because there was no housing for them. And they required a large number of construction people to come to Kingsport to build Holston Ordnance.
Mm-hmm.
And so all those little houses were built for those workers. Then after World War II, when of course Holston Ordnance was built and all the construction was over, and those people moved on, those houses really were wonderful for returning veterans who had been in World War II and were coming back to work mainly at Eastman, but other places also. And I think the vision that First Presbyterian Church had to look for a church site there, and that there would be a need for a church with so many newcomers, that their vision to do that and then subsequently doing it was a great blessing.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, you and Dad left Kingsport when the war started, and Daddy was in ROTC, and he was a reserve officer,
Yeah,
I
he
guess.
was a reserve officer, so he was called in early. And so we left in March of 42.
Okay. So a lot of the young men and young couples would have been in that same situation and would have left probably in early 42.
Right.
And then you were gone until when did you all move back here?
We came back in late 45.
Okay.
Actually, Daddy came back. You couldn't find any place to live. Again, we had that situation. And so when we came back, I couldn't come immediately because we hadn't found a place to live. But we finally came back and got settled in early 46.
Okay. So, so you all basically came back to First Presbyterian, or by the time you came back, you were coming to Waverly Road?
Yeah, they were just starting with a little Sunday school out there.
Mm-hmm.
And but then I went back to Charlotte to have Bob, and you and Portia went and stayed with the grandparents and with my aunt for several months before we actually, as a total family, got back here in about early May of 46.
But you had been back in
Yeah,
and out.
yeah, I'd been in and out.
And because you signed the petition, I guess, that was signed by the original charter
Yeah.
members. Your signature is on that as
Yeah.
well as Dad's. I've heard you tell this many times, but if you had to say one person that was really the most instrumental in making sure that it happened at Waverly Road.
I think it would have been Irvin Rankin and Clyde.
And I guess he wasn't in the military, was he?
No.
So he was here all through that
Right.
time.
So he was a member of First Presbyterian,
Right.
and so he was the first one he and his wife, to commit to going to this new chapel and staying there. And there were some very fine people who agreed to come out and teach Sunday school and get it started, but they had strong family ties and had grown up in First Presbyterian. So they did not want to leave permanently First Presbyterian. But Irvin and Clyde Rankin were among the ones who continued, who were members of First Presbyterian.
And their son John is my age, and he was one of my very first friends, and he and I were baptized together by Dr. McCorkle at First Presbyterian. So he and I were around about 4 years old when Waverly Road actually got started. And now among those still living are Laura Cloud LaPrade and Roy Cloud, and their mom and their brother Neil were early members, and then they had a brother Eddie who was my age. So the first elders were Daddy, Hall Morrison, Irvin Rankin, and I believe Mr. Matheson.
Yeah.
And then, because I was looking at a list earlier. So by the time the church was actually chartered, the little first building was there. Is that right?
Yes.
And how do you remember? What do you remember about that building?
Well, it was the bare little church, and it was heated by a pot-bellied stove in the sanctuary. Well, the sanctuary was mainly the whole building, and there was a long room, which was the sanctuary, and off of it were several doors that were Sunday school rooms. And it had one little bathroom, but in the wintertime there had to be a lot of work by the officers to keep the fire going in the pot-bellied stove.
I bet.
to heat that building.
Do you remember in particular, well, you would have had, we would have been, the kids my age would have been about 4, and there were a few older kids like the Clouds and some of these people I don't really.
Well, not very many though.
No, it was mostly younger.
Yeah.
And we had found a list here of the kids that were born the year the church started, and it was really interesting. It included Bob, my brother, Morrison, and J.C., and Susan Carpenter, Bill Rankin, Duncan and Raymond Rose, and there were a whole bunch of them, more than I am remembering. But anyway, another place that we were reading was talking about the baby boom that just continued on at Waverly Road, and
How many were baptized?
how many were baptized, and we found a little skit that was put together for the 25th anniversary that you took part in, and Lewis Carson and Ben Thompson and Zellie Ernest and a number of different people took part in this little skit, but it was basically kind of going over the basic history of the church. When in 1944, the population of Kingsport was 17,000, and everybody was the people who actually still lived in Kingsport and had not gone off to war were, you know, under all the rationing and that sort of thing, and life without any luxuries. And so going back to Mr. J. Fred Johnson, when they early on, before the first little building was built, they were meeting in having Sunday school classes in some of the old buildings right across there in the parking lot area,
facing Senator.
and the old Armor drugstore, and in the barber shop over there, and the laundromat later on. They were looking at renting rooms in the Armor drugstore building area, and they approached Mr. J. Fred Johnson about renting the rooms, and Reverend Currie recalls permission had been denied to another church, and in all fairness, Mr. Johnson wanted to avoid showing favoritism to his own denomination. After much prayer, Mr. Currie visited Mr. Johnson and persuaded him, if our little outpost doesn't at least get started somewhere, we might lose initiative. I've come to the same conclusion, replied Dr. Johnson, or Mr. Johnson, excuse me. Give this man a receipt for the first month's rent. So he was saying, okay, that's taken care of.